you should always engage with anything that you see in an experience. That's always my advice. Whether it seems beautiful, whether it seems terrifying, anything that it is, what you should do is confront it respectfully and just ask, hey, why are you here? Why am I seeing you? What am I supposed to learn from you? Because it is there to help you understand something. And once you've got through the different levels of what you'll go through to get past your trauma and understand what you are, there becomes a whole nother world of engaging with the other side and all these different entities.
The amazing thing about the mushrooms is that they speak. They talk to you. They will answer questions, carry on conversations. Psilocybin just pulls up a chair on the porch and puts its feet up.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says. For those of you who are watching the video, well, you're getting a special treat already, are you not? You may be wondering, why is Eric wearing a wizard's robe? Well, aside from the fact that I am wizard-like from time to time, it's actually in honor of the guest in this episode, David Hodges. David is the founder of the Church of Ambrosia. He's someone who I have watched from afar and, I will admit, been skeptical of for a while until meeting him in Denver. And the skepticism generally surrounded the fact that he wore a bishop or a pope's outfit that is covered with embroidered cannabis leaves. I did question his sincerity before I met him. I had pretty extensive conversations with him at MAPS and over the phone several times since then, and in this recording that you're going to be privy to as well. We touch on a lot of topics, from the raid that was executed on his church in, I forget the year, but he'll tell you. His sincerity and practice and mega dosing and some of the work that he's been doing over the years with sacred mushrooms and what led him here. It's all in an effort to show that there are so many ways of practicing with this sacrament, and that an individual's sincerity is not judged by their outward appearance, but more so by their outward actions. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with David. I really have come to respect and appreciate this gentleman and the work that he does to advance the cause out there in California. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share, do all those fun things if you want to. No pressure. I've got a lot more great episodes coming for you in this chapter, and let's get on to it. Yeah, all right, David, it's a pleasure to have you on Psilocybin Says.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, you've always been so generous with your time ever since we spoke in Denver. I have watched you from afar for years. I was pondering, getting ready for this conversation, are you the first open psychedelic or psilocybin church in the U.S.?
I don't know if we were necessarily. We definitely weren't the first. I mean, this is not really that new. We're probably the first to get this big, and definitely the first to do what we do.
Yeah, you do things definitely in a unique way. So can you just share with our audience a little bit of your journey that even brought you to forming a psilocybin church?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story, but we actually started as a cannabis church, and it was within 6 months of opening in Oakland that they passed the lowest priority for all entheogenic plants. At the time, I had been drawn to mushrooms, but I hadn't actually tried them. And I knew that before I could provide them as a church, I had to understand them. And that started a very crazy path that I talk about in some YouTube videos, where I went from doing 2 grams of mushrooms for the first time to, within the first 3 months of ever doing them, hitting 30 grams of mushrooms in a single dose. Not what I recommend. It's a path that I had to go on, and it was really, from my perspective, a training exercise in order for me to move forward to become who I am today. But that really started off the path with the mushrooms, and at first I wasn't sure how big of a part it was going to be. But the difference between the two, cannabis is an amazing tool, and if you use it right, a very powerful sacrament. But it doesn't show you what the mushrooms can show you. The way I describe it is it lets you use your inner eye to examine things around you and stuff in this world. The deep work with the mushrooms, you have experiences that can only be described as spiritual visions. You leave your body, you experience what happens after you die. You're capable of connecting directly with your soul and even having an experience with God. You can't quite do that with cannabis, but what the mushrooms have showed me completely changed who I am.
Mm-hmm. What in the world inspired you or directed you to go from 2 grams to 30 grams in that short of a window? That's a leap.
Well, I mean, again, it's kind of a long story, but so I did the 2 grams, and I got the fun effects. Your hands look a little funny, and the patterns and the wood grains are moving. But I knew I had to do the 5-gram heroic dose. This was just the most anybody ever talked about, and it was the reference point for the spiritual experience. So I did 5 grams. And I came out of the loop. You need to learn how to breathe, and you need to do more mushrooms. Now, at the time, I was just a little ridiculous and said, "What do you know, mushrooms? I'm breathing right now." But knowing that the lethal dose was somewhere around 5 pounds, I knew that I had to do more. So I did 10 grams. And I came out in the exact same loop. You need to learn how to breathe, and you need to do more mushrooms. Except this time I decided to Google how to breathe. And if you Google how to breathe, you'll find a TED Talk, and you'll find multiple talkers talking about how, as a society, we've forgotten how to breathe. What they're talking about is we've started breathing with our upper backs and stopped using our diaphragms. The diaphragm is a muscle we have to breathe with. So the fact that we're not using the muscle that we have to breathe with is kind of a major problem. And elderly who are having back problems anyways are now having breathing problems because they stopped using their diaphragm their entire life, and now they're having back problems. So taking a deep breath hurts. I was one of those people. So how did I know that I didn't know how to breathe? And that really, is what I talk about a lot. Is there's 2 possibilities, although I do believe they're both true. Is one, that there are guides on the other side, and they knew this was the first lesson that I needed to learn before I move forward, or the mushrooms let me connect with something deep inside myself that was able to clearly communicate, hey, you're doing this wrong. You need to learn how to do it right. So from there, I got the same message: learn how to breathe and do more mushrooms. So I did 15 grams a few weeks later, letting my tolerance clear out. This was the first, what I describe as a breakthrough dose. I actually met entities on the other side. It was an amazing experience, but it ended with these 3 golden beings sitting down with me and describing why I went through everything in my life, what they needed me to do, and really helped me understand why I exist and what I'm here for. And I've been doing that ever since. But that was at 15 grams. So I did next 20 grams again a few weeks later. And then the highest dose that I ever did when I finally stopped getting the message of do more mushrooms as a part of it, in a single dose. Past the 15 gram point, I definitely reached the breakthrough level. But now, I mean, that's one of the other things that's really worth discussing, is we don't talk about mushroom quantity anymore. Now it's really more about how much psilocybin you're consuming. Because what we've seen at the church is that there are mushrooms that are literally 40 times stronger than others. So if you're going based on grams and you think that you're doing a gram of mushrooms, but you're used to the weakest ones and you do a gram of the strongest ones, it's like doing 40 grams of the mushrooms you're used to. So knowing that that's the case, we really can't use that as a metric to try to understand where these points are or how much mushrooms people are consuming.
So this is something that, particularly now as we have so many different varieties of psilocybin mushroom coming in, that is really not being communicated out well enough. I've had a number of people who have contacted me either during a trip or right after a trip, and they're like, oh my God, somebody gave me these mushrooms and I just took a gram and they just ripped me apart, So I've seen you doing what you can, it seems like, to educate the public around this subject. How do we do this better? Because even within a single strain, the variability can be so wide.
Within the same tub.
Within the same
right.
tub,
they
exactly,
can vary in potency up to 100% within the same tub. So, between the same strain and different growers and different environments and different substrate, there's a huge vary. But even if everything is the same, they can still vary up to 100% in potency. So
how do people prepare themselves for that?
I mean, what we've started doing is providing ground tested sacrament. So we homogenize it into a powder, and then we get the test results, and then we can tell you how much psilocybin you're consuming. If you don't have that ability to do that, the best thing to do is get a larger quantity of mushrooms for yourself, more than you think you're going to use for a while, just so you can store it and have something consistent to work with. Homogenize it, so grind it up. As long as you store it in an airtight container with a silicon desiccant in there that removes moisture, in a dark, cool place, it actually shouldn't be in your freezer, shouldn't be in your fridge. Moisture is a big problem. So any sort of cool, dry environment, the back of a drawer or something like that is perfect. If it's got the silicon desiccant in there and it's airtight, that stuff will last. We've had stuff that we tested a year later and it got stronger. So the reason it's getting stronger is because there's less moisture in it than there was, because we store it with the desiccants in it. But you would expect that if you stored it for a year in a homogenized bag, that it would get weaker. And when we did the test results, it actually got stronger. So if you grind your mushrooms together so you have a consistent thing that you're working with, then you can take a smaller amount of it and see how that affects you, and then really kind of understand from there. If you're trying to be as safe as possible, the most important thing is to start small. But in exactly what you're talking about, a gram of mushrooms. So what we talk about is the micrograms per gram that mushrooms contain of pure psilocybin. So if a mushroom tests at, say, the average golden teacher tests at about 0.2 to 0.4%, which would be 2,000 to 4,000 micrograms per gram. Relatively low. Penis MV can test anywhere from 6,000 to all the way up to 12 to 16,000 micrograms per gram. The strongest ones that we've seen come through the shop or through the church are 26,000 micrograms per gram. And
Jesus, what strain was
I forget. I believe it was it was some sort of PE cross. I can't remember which. It might have been Ghost. I honestly can't remember at this point. But again, it's not about the strain, because we've had
Right.
the same strain
Right.
tested, and Golden Teacher is a good example. Like the weakest Golden Teacher we had tested at 0.1%, and the strongest, which is by one of our really good growers, tests I think at 0.7%, which is the strongest of any test result for any Golden Teacher I'd ever seen. So there's huge variation just in grower and environment alone. But here's the thing: the strongest that's been seen in the wild test around 5%, which would be 50,000 micrograms per gram. And just to put some of this in context, the point that I call the breakthrough dose, where that starts for somebody my size, which is about 260 pounds, is 52,000 micrograms. So 1 gram of the strongest mushrooms that have been seen in the wild is capable of taking somebody my size to the start of the breakthrough dose. Well, a 100-pound person reaches that point at around 20,000 micrograms. So that same gram would be 250% of their breakthrough dose. Right. So there's a whole bunch of things that we've been learning as we've been doing the test results and combining it with the high dose work to try to understand this stuff. But really, the big problem is to avoid the overdose states. And, the overdose states are not going to kill you, but you don't want to take more mushrooms than you intend to. I don't care what you're trying to do with it. That's never your goal. You want to take a certain amount so you have a certain experience. You don't want to take an amount where you leave your body and start flying around the universe when you thought you were just going to go for a walk in the park.
For sure. So, God, you bring up so many things I'd love to dig into here. I guess the first I want to ask your observation of the correlation of weight, body weight, to dosage. That's something that I have seen be all over the place. I've seen 300-pound guys get smacked by 2 grams, and 80-pound, 100-pound women taking 12 grams, and all the same, in a homogenized batch. The Jamaica, it's administered so much, they were always homogenized, and it never seemed to me that body weight really was that much of a factor. And I'm curious, you referenced that, so what are you seeing?
Well, so one of the other biggest factors that probably affected a lot more than you realized in those is tolerance. So tolerance for mushrooms will build up overnight. So in general rule of thumb, if you do 1 gram today, you need to do 2 grams tomorrow to feel in the same place. That tolerance lasts for 3 to 4 weeks. So if somebody's doing a microdose of like 0.2 every day, or even just, every week they're taking mushrooms, they've got a pretty significant tolerance that they don't realize. So what we do, and also with that said, there's a bunch of other factors. But tolerance is a huge one, because people don't, especially when you're talking about microdosing, the definition of microdosing and what people consider to be a microdose is way all over the place. I've talked to people who are like, oh yeah, I microdose. What do you do? Well, I nibble on about 2 grams throughout the day.
I've heard of the 2 grams as a microdose. Yeah.
No. your tolerance is crazy. I mean, that's that person who's consuming 2 grams or even 1/8 a day. The most I heard was somebody who was consuming about 1/4 ounce a day. Now, they weren't calling it microdosing, but they claimed to be able to drive a car and go to class, and I was just looking at them like, how? So tolerance is a huge factor. When we do the breakthrough dose, I insist that nobody everybody not consume mushrooms for at least 3 weeks before the ceremony. Ideally longer than that. When you're really trying to do the breakthrough dose work, and reach that state, the information that comes out of it and the experiences are so intense that doing mushrooms once a month is a lot of mushrooms. That's. But when you're talking about a lot of the community who has a different relationship with mushrooms, where they do anything from nibble on them throughout the day to take even a capsule every day, or really follow one of the microdose protocols, or even just every weekend they're doing mushrooms. Those are all huge factors. The other ones have to do with body chemistry, diet, medications, supplements. There's things that people don't think about that can be major factors. One example is this stuff called methylene blue. I don't know if you are aware of it. It's it's got an interesting story behind it, and there's some rabbit holes to go down. I'm torn between whether or not it's good or not, but it happens to be a very powerful MAOI, and that's one of those things that people don't quite understand about it. And if you are doing that and you consume mushrooms, you're going to feel an intense amplification, 2 to 3 times what you would expect to feel. So there's, I'm not saying body weight is the only factor, but if tolerance is non-existent, so you're dealing with people who haven't consumed mushrooms in 3 weeks to a month, or even ever. I deal with a lot of people who have never consumed mushrooms. That body weight ratio is one of the most important tools that you have. Okay. And again, medications, supplements, body chemistry, tolerance. I'm sure there's a body mass factor too. The anorexic person versus the athlete versus the overweight. I'm sure there's some factors into that too. But the thing that we know is we don't know everything, and that if all factors are the same, a 100-pound person and a 200-pound person will experience the same dose differently.
What do you say to somebody like myself that really values that kind of intimacy of eating the mushroom? Because what you're speaking to in terms of homogenization, I absolutely understand and agree with that in terms of safety, dosing. But I work with a lot of people and myself. Like, I want to see the mushrooms. I want to eat them fresh, ideally. How does somebody kind of prepare themselves for the unknown of that action?
If that's what your strong connection is to, you just have to accept the fact that you're in the hands of the mushrooms. And I've done that many times, and I still live my life in the hands of the mushrooms. But there's one of the old sayings that I'm sure will resonate with you is, you get the dose that you need. So it's what for me is really important is making sure that you get the dose that you need and you get the work done that you're supposed to do. And part of that has to do with making sure that you remember the experience, because that's one of the big problems with the first level of overdose with mushrooms. Is if you've gone into those experiences and you come out with zero memory and you're like, what happened? Something happened. You just did too much to be able to bring it back. So when you're talking about people like you and me who have done a lot of this deep work and understand these things, there can be times where it's okay that we don't bring everything back. There's a ceremony that I talk about where, it was one of the last major overdoses I had, but I remember about 5% of the ceremony. And of the 5% that I remember, the first part, I'm dealing with entities that want all humans to experience nuclear death. And I experienced nuclear death outside of time. So if a bomb went off right now, you would just instantly disappear. If time and space doesn't exist, you can experience every impact to every molecule of everything that you are. So that first part, I remember that going into the ceremony, and coming out of the ceremony, I remember coming up the stairs multiple times to ask the sitters to check their phones to see if the nuclear missiles have been launched. Right. So fortunately, I came up one time when they're like, "Oh, Dave, you're just crazy. Nothing's happening." Yes, nothing's happening. So do I really need or want to remember the other 95% of that ceremony? Not really. I'm sure there was something getting done. I know it was important. I made it back here. We're talking right now. For the most part, the world still exists. But when you come to talking about like doing deep work to get past trauma and to understand who you are and why you exist and what you're supposed to do in this world, you really need to remember those. If you're sitting down with your soul and your soul is telling you a message and it's telling you something that you need to change or something you need to do or something to help you understand what you're going through, you really need that message. To go into that dose and to come out of it without any memory of it is really unfortunate. So, when it comes to, and the other thing, since you said you like eating them straight, you haven't had my tea yet. So,
I've seen your teas on Instagram.
And that's just mushroom. It turns that blue. I don't put like food coloring in it or anything like that. That is pure, just the mushrooms giving me this magic potion to give you.
Yeah, I've seen the pile of mushrooms that you turn into a tea, and that is formidable. Still, my highest dose has been 15 grams at this point still, and it's interesting though. My most potent experience was 6 grams, which speaks to the variability and potency. But you stand at a very unique place to talk about something that I personally think needs to be discussed more publicly within psychedelic culture, and the spiritual perspective provides a lot more opportunity for that, and that is this understanding of entities and beings on the other side. This is something that I have experienced many, many times, but only in the last maybe 2 years has it become so real to me, because it has started to bleed over into. You remember me telling you about that?
Yep.
Yeah. And so I would love to talk a little bit about your understanding and experience with the other worlds that exist, and at the same time, if we could touch on whether or not you believe there is need for any precaution, or are we just always safe in our experiences no matter who or what we encounter?
Well, let me address that part first.
Okay.
For the most part, and what really is the most important is set and setting. So if you are around some really bad people, you're probably not safe. And whether or not you recognize if they're good or bad is a challenge. That's this work to me. One of the most important things is you're with yourself, by yourself, going through what you need to go through. So if there's somebody who claims to be a shaman who doesn't have the greatest intentions or doesn't really know what they're doing, or you go to a place that's really not appropriate for the work that you need to do. An example might be like a plantation. If you're gonna go try to get through some of your own trauma and understand some of your own work, and you go to somewhere where there's a whole bunch of tortured souls still hanging out, I wouldn't necessarily say you're always going to be unsafe, but there's a chance of it. And regardless, it's going to affect the work that you're trying to do. Right. So to me, the best space is really your home, where you're most comfortable. If you're not comfortable in your home, then don't do it in your home, and find somebody else's home that is comfortable, where you feel safe around somebody that, they don't need to necessarily know how to protect you on the other side. They just need to know how to protect you on this side. And if you're around somebody that you feel comfortable and really believe can protect you on this side, you will be protected on the other side. Your soul is an incredibly powerful thing. If you can get in touch with it and communicate with it, it has the ability to overcome anything that is put in your path. So, I want to say, yes, you're going to always be safe, but there's some kind of relatively common sense that might be a little harder to identify in some cases of the, is this actually the person that I should be around when I'm doing this work?
I think that's a wonderful point. We're generally, I guess it's become more of my belief that the three-dimensional world that we're immediately surrounded by is a reflection of the multidimensional world that it sits inside of. And so, yes, your external indicators in your physical reality can provide evidence to what kind of metaphysical environment you will be entering into. I love that. That's wonderfully said. So how do you have a process for engaging or understanding these entities? Do you have relationships? Like how do you relate and how do you engage over there?
Well, it's a very complicated question, because it's not like there's only one type of entity or one level of entity or one dimension that contains entities or anything like that. And just to go on a slightly different tangent for a second, what I was shown when the universe that we experience existed, was created, is that the Big Bang and that energy from it was also used to create other things. And although it expressed itself in this dimension as this dimension and what we're experiencing at the moment, that same energy was also able to convert directly into life many times. So in the landscape that's out there, you have everything from realities similar and in every version of what we're currently in, to realities where reality wasn't even created, but life was created. So ultimate expanding universe of life and experiences in every direction possible, in every way possible. So, with that as the landscape, it really depends on which entities and which levels of entities that you're talking about. And there are entities that are much closer to this reality, and some that even reach into this reality, and some that just surround and study this reality, some that interact with it. And then there's levels beyond them, and levels beyond them. So if, you know, and the other thing that's really difficult about this topic, and I'm sure too much of this is probably resonating with you, but, you know, any levels of these entities, even the ones that are closest to us, ancient humans having these experiences would call gods. So there's, when you try to even define what these are, it's really hard to understand unless you really have a good vision of the landscape. You're not going to be able to see the whole thing ever. Just understand that there are the ones who are between this world and the next. There are the ones that live in what we would call the next world. And then there's hierarchies that go far past any of that, all the way to the foundation, which is the consciousness that created everything, which is just pure consciousness. It doesn't necessarily have a will. It doesn't not have a will, because all of us are its will. But, you know, so are all the gods, and so are all the different levels of these entities. So if we're talking about entities that are attached to this world, still living in this world alongside of us, things that people would generally consider to be spirits, or, you know, I mean, they've been called many different things over the years, but the allies that we feel closest to us, being able to properly engage them too, that becomes the other next big challenge to this, is before you're ready to really interact with these entities at the level of truly being able to understand them, first you've got to get past the trauma that you've gone through in this life. You've got to understand what you are outside of this body, and truly understand what your soul is. And once you've done that, then you're really ready to engage and try to understand what those things are. But that whole process is not one dose, that's not two doses, it all depends on what you have to go through. That can be a lot of work to get there.
Right.
And part of the process of getting there is both getting past the things that are holding you back in this life, but even more importantly is understanding the language of the soul. You know, this is to be able to communicate with these entities as your true self. You have to understand what your true self is, and you have to be able to speak your true language. So the ones that come to you before you're ready to really engage with it, you should always engage with anything that you see in an experience. That's always my advice. Whether it seems beautiful, whether it seems terrifying, anything that it is, what you should do is confront it respectfully and just ask, hey, why are you here? Why am I seeing you? What am I supposed to learn from you? Because it is there to help you understand something. And once you've got through the different levels of what you'll go through to get past your trauma and understand what you are, there becomes a whole nother world of engaging with the other side and all these different entities.
Dave, it's always refreshing to talk with you because you just shed light on aspects of this experience that are so infrequently do people even have the courage to approach, I feel like. Did coming into this, did you have a background that prepared you for these types of encounters, these types of experiences? What was your religious spiritual background?
No. I had no idea what I was getting into. My background, I started off in a Presbyterian church as a kid, and then became a little bit more of an atheist in high school. Then I realized that atheism is kind of just as ridiculous as anything else you can't possibly know. So I became more of an agnostic. Through the use of cannabis, I slowly became a little more what I would call spiritual. And the most spiritual connection that I had when I opened the church, the thing that drove me to do it was cannabis. So that was the path. And as the cannabis church, I knew this was the right thing to do, but I felt a little uncomfortable about talking about God, about talking about any of the things that I just shared with you. I would have never been comfortable talking about my soul or why I came here or what I'm supposed to do or God or what exists past this world without the mushrooms. So, it was, when I reached my first breakthrough dose and actually saw entities, I didn't really know I was going to see them. Hindsight 2020, it makes a lot of sense. On my 10-gram dose, I didn't quite see them. I saw kind of like clouds, and I could tell there was something there, but it wasn't fully there. And when you get into the different levels of the dosing, what we call the breakthrough dose is where you get closed eye visuals. And from the closed eye visuals, as you go up higher, about 150% of your breakthrough dose with no tolerance. And once you figure out what your dosage is, and a bunch of different factors you got to figure out first, but at about 150% is where you get the intense open eye visuals, and even to the point of being able to smell and touch and leave your body and fully interact with the other side. So I had no idea I was getting into that. I had no idea that was even a possibility. I just knew this is what I had to do. And up to the first 30-gram dose, I would come back in a loop with a message every time. So the message I got after doing 15 grams and meeting these entities that told me why I was here and what I was supposed to do was, there's more knowledge to spread and do more mushrooms. And at that point, I Googled high dose mushrooms, and the only one I could find was the late Kalindi E. And Kalindi just so happened to be speaking at a conference in Portland the next weekend. I go there, I walk in the door, the first one to interact with me, like registration's on the right, Kalindi's standing right in front of me and is the first person to say anything to me, and he thinks he recognizes me. Right? I mean, this is the way the mushrooms work. Literally the person that I'm supposed to see there is the first person to say a word to me, and he thinks he already knows me. The next message I got, and again, followed by do more mushrooms. After meeting him, I was comfortable going up further, but the 20-gram message was the journey has just begun and do more mushrooms. And the 30-gram message was when I finally got everything will be okay, without the do more mushrooms part. So I felt that was my the end of my training exercise that took me up to 30 grams. Not that I haven't gone deeper than that since, and now that we're talking about micrograms, I don't even know how much psilocybin I did. You know, that was the story that got me here. But, you know, I wish I could say that there was something that prepared me for it. Though one of the things that's been really interesting is, since I wasn't so prepared for it, I didn't have a lot of like foundation of what I might experience. And it's been really interesting to go back after experiencing a lot of these things to look at the stuff that was done in the 60s and 70s and be like, whoa, they were experiencing dragons back then? I had no idea dragons were part of a psychedelics experience. And, you know, dragons are also real. They live in another dimension. That's a whole nother side tangent. But, you know, it's and the other really common entity that a lot of people have experienced are the mantis creatures.
Oh my gosh.
Which, you know, I have a funny relationship with them, but, you know, they're not bad. They're definitely there and prevalent, and something that has been reported independently for years, and something that I had no awareness of until I experienced it.
I've heard that story so many times, and it's part of my story as well. Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to know though, is any of this bleeding over into this reality? Do you feel like you are still have a potential to contact and communicate with any of these intelligences outside of the mushroom space?
Well, you know, there's some stuff I would get into more in depth if this wasn't a public conversation with you. And I look forward to the day that we can go real in depth on some of that stuff. But, you know, what I will say is, because of what I am on the other side, there's a lot of stuff I understand about them, and they don't bother me unless they really need
to. Understood. Wow. Yeah. I always forget how much I enjoy talking with you, Dave. You know, I want to say, when I first saw an article or something about you out there, I was like, this guy's a fucking joker, right? And in Denver, I was just allowing myself to be led, and there was this point where I was brought to this spot and stood in this spot, and I'm like, all right, what is it? And then you showed up, and I was just like, all right, I'm gonna talk to him. And immediately, like your energy, your vibe, I was like, no, this guy, he understands some things, and we're operating in a similar manner. So I love when my misconceptions are completely blown out of the water. So thank you for doing that. And I want to ask, like, how do you respond to people that think that your church is just a cover for distribution, or that you're not sincere because of maybe how they see you presenting yourself? Do you even respond to that?
You know, to me, they just need to do the work. You know, that's the unfortunate truth. You know, there's a lot of people that will judge me based on what they would do or they wouldn't do, or, you know, what what's going through their head. I know what I'm here to do. I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I know that this is right in ways that are deeper than I can even express. You know, so I don't really worry about them too much. I just keep doing my thing.
I deeply appreciate that. How has your, you know, if you're growing up in a Presbyterian church and now you're leading a psilocybin church, like, how do you understand this word church that we throw around? What does that mean to David Hodges?
Well, you know, to me, the church is a gathering place for people to talk about religion. That's all it is. Now, when you look at the trauma that has been created by churches and the overarching religions in this world, that has nothing to do with the word church. You know, the church is the gathering place, the community center where you can access God and talk to other people who are doing the same work. You know, so we one of these days I'll have the building big enough for us to be the real mega church that we are, but you know, providing a place where people can safely get sacrament and they can discuss this work, and you know, they can know, like, if they have any problems, there's somebody that they can talk to. You didn't just pick some random mushrooms off the ground. You didn't get a bag from somebody and you don't know what's in it. And we're doing the best we can to make sure that everybody is safe and has as much information as possible. So to me, we're what a church should be.
You have what? The last I saw, you had like 50,000 members or something. What is it?
I think we were at 80. We're at 106.
Wow.
1,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a real testimony to how many people are out there seeking spirituality through psychedelics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what's amazing is how many people don't know we exist yet. Like, we don't advertise. We've got some coverage. It started with us getting raided, which I know is something you wanted to talk about.
Say that brought some.
But you know, the raid was one of the best things for us, because before that we were word of mouth only. You did not know unless you knew. So if you knew, then your friend would bring you in, and that was how we got 20,000 members. Referral only. But then we got raided, and the cat was out of the bag. And you know, before the raid, I would literally scrub the internet for any time our address appeared and try to remove it. You could only find us if you went down some real deep Reddit rabbit holes, and then you could find the church. After the raid, if you Google Oakland Mushroom Church, you will find us. So,
did you have any idea that was coming? How'd that shake down? And I'm sure you've told this story a million times. I want you to talk about it in the way that you really want to. In this moment. So,
look, I have no problem telling the exact story. I don't know if we got too much time for me to go into the absolute depth of it, but I did know it was coming, not the exact date or not exactly how it would go down. But the thing about raids is they always happen around presidential elections. So I've predicted some more things to happen fairly soon, over the next, well, before November, generally before September even. So, and this is not information that I have from the other side. This is not anything other than common sense, understanding the history of how the drug war works. Now, when we got raided, what I wasn't expecting was it to only be local PD, and for them to have a factually bad warrant, and that the firefighters and a bunch of cops would be involved right when California was on fire and George Floyd was happening. So the actual details of the raid, I could have never imagined that. If there was one thing that I would have said is it wouldn't be local PD, and especially right then because they had a bunch of other shit to be doing, you know. But what happened is they came in, they raided us with guns. They cleared everybody outside of the building. They cut into one of our saves So one of the ridiculous parts of what they did is they used the firefighters with the equipment that they would use to save somebody from a car crash to cut a window-sized hole in one of our safes. Like, I've had to break into those safes before. I've had professionals do it. You don't cut a window-sized hole into a safe. Took them 2 hours to do. They injured a firefighter. There was blood dripped across the floor. Long story short, I came back down with a letter about an hour after they started, and said, "Hey, if you sign this, I'll let you into the safes." The negotiation between me and the sergeant was, look, I can't. They were saying I can't sign this letter. The only person who would be able to do it would be the city attorney. And I was saying, well, look, it took you 2 hours to get into one safe. There's 4 more of those, and I have one safe in there that's rated at 8 hours for a professional safecracker. So you're a professional. You have all the tools. You know what you're doing. You're having a good day. 8 hours. So the negotiation ended up with, okay, let us into the 8-hour safe and we'll pack our bags and leave. Right. So what's the significance of the 8-hour safe? Well, one would expect if I had a whole bunch of money sitting around that I'd be keeping it in that 8-hour safe. Funnily enough, I'd been kind of kicking myself for not using that safe for, well, basically ever since I put it in. And there was nothing but some old paperwork in there. And I even told the sergeant that, but the way the whole dynamic was going down, the person who caused the raid, the police officer, who's no longer with Oakland PD, by the way, the police officer who was running the raid insisted that they had to get into that safe before they left. And the sergeant made the deal with me. So I opened the safe. They saw the old paperwork. The guy that caused the raid was pissed off, threw it on the floor, and the cops packed their bags and left. But the moral of this story, and what obviously they were going after, was money. You know, this was what we call in the cannabis industry a smash and grab, where the cops come in and they take all your weed and they take all your money, and there's very many times where there's no legal charges, right? And that's what happened in this case. I was never charged with any sort of criminal penalties, and the DA never even took up the case. But when you looked at the case, it was they didn't put psilocybin on the warrant. They put marijuana felonies. But in California, we legalized marijuana and we removed all the marijuana felonies. So the warrant literally said we were committing crimes that don't exist in California. Yeah, well, look, I know why it all happened.
Yeah, what was the trigger?
Well, no, the trigger was the elections. They do. I mean, without getting too in depth on how the war on drugs works, basically asset forfeiture money, the money that they take during raids, ends up in the political coffers of the associations who lobby for the war on drugs. So the more money that they can take, the more money they can give to politicians, and the more they can influence politicians saying, look, things are so bad, we just raided and got $1 million in cash and 100,000 pounds of drugs, and, you know, here's your money to win your election, but also when the funding bills come up, just make sure you're tough on the war on drugs. So, you know, there's a rigged system, and the real cause of the raid was the presidential election and them trying to do these cash grabs. What they didn't expect was for me to not just roll over and for it to be a big story that blew up. Because they raided actually one other church and I believe 4 other Measure Z clubs on the same day. But the Measure Z clubs, which only do cannabis, you know, if you tell the media, oh, hey, we raided an illegal pot club, they're just going to roll their eyes. They're so used to that. They're like, that's not even a news story. The other church that got raided, they weren't true to the work. They weren't in it for the right reason. They thought that this was just a way that they could get away with what they were doing. And when they got raided, they shut down and disappeared. Yeah.
Oh, really?
When I got raided, I said, "Hey, what the fuck are you guys doing?"
Yeah, you went harder. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was, the reason the raid happened is because it needed to happen, because I needed to, everybody needed to know about us, and we needed to grow. It was, we lost about 200,000 worth of sacrament. It was not a very great day in my life. It was not one of those high moments. But in hindsight, it was the trigger for why you even know we exist.
Man. Wow. So it seems like being in that place, not only are you, cutting edge in terms of exposure for psychedelic churches, but I feel like psychedelic churches generally are reframing how we understand church, religion, spirituality overall. Do you feel that the Church of Ambrosia has any direct role to play in kind of reframing our cultural understanding of church and religion?
Absolutely. I mean, that is without a doubt one of my biggest goals.
So how do you envision that playing out, or describe that goal?
Well, for me, a lot of this has to do with the real deep work. But in general, what I say is, and this is true for cannabis too, but especially for mushrooms, what they're doing is dissolving the border between this world and the next. And the first thing on the other side is your soul. To me, that really should be the foundation for religion, is getting in touch with one's soul and understanding why you came to this world, what you're supposed to do, and what exists beyond this life. So, for me, redefining church is it's redefining access to our souls. It depends on the church, but many, especially Christians, are taught to just, you have a soul and pray to God. To me, God is a consciousness that existed before all else. It's not an old dude with a beard. In fact, we are part of God. So the thing that is so much more important is to communicate with your soul. And once you do that, then you can build a relationship with whatever you need to beyond that. But that to me is what the real redefinition is, the church needs to be a place where you are taught, you are given access to, you have people to talk to about this stuff, all about accessing your soul and getting through what you need to get through in this life.
I'm just pausing because you asked me, a question in Denver that has been one of the most important questions to me. That's helped me continue to explore that notion of soul. And as we work to expand, our church here and our community here, so much of what my experiences and what it sounds like you're communicating, your vision of church and religious experience, is it's so personal, right? It's such a personal experience, And I'm really curious how you are managing, if at all, like what's your approach to community development, community leadership in a in in an experience, in a relationship that is so intimately personal, you know, and it kind of backs into this reformatting our understanding of church, because it's been for 6,000 years at least, it's been top down, dogmatic. Here's how you worship. Here's what you do. How do you, as a church leader, if you even perceive yourself as that, uh, kind of interface with your membership in a way that disarms that kind of um, hierarchical model?
You know, I think for me, it's just the general approach that I have to this work. You know, we're not. I'm not above anybody when it comes to talking to your own soul. That's in fact something I need to get out of the way of. My role and my goal is to make sure that you have the best experience that you can have, interacting with your soul, meaning that you go in with the right intent that really helps you get questions answered, and that you remember the experience, and that it's done in the right space and the right context. That's really my biggest role, is to make sure that you understand what those things are. And then if there's something that you can't understand, or there's an experience beyond what anybody else can talk to you about or understand, that's where the other role of the leadership is to try to help you understand that experience. You know, the experience was there for you, and it's there for you to understand. But some of these experiences can be so overwhelming that, you know, it takes people years to understand. And some of them can be so weird that they feel embarrassed telling somebody about them. Some of them can be so bizarre that you can't even describe it with words. You can try in different ways, but you know, if you're talking to somebody who's never had these experiences, they're not going to understand what you're saying for sure. You know, so to me, the leadership, and that's one of the more long-term goals that we're working on, is to get more people to the level of where they've had a bunch of these experiences and they understand what their soul is and what their work is, so that they can help others. But that's not an overnight thing. That's not a, you know, here's a 2-day training course. You know, it's potentially years of work.
Right.
You know, it's for sure, in a best case scenario, at least a year, and it, depending on what you have to go through, and you know, how open you are to the experience and what other challenges you got to get through. I mean, this could be a 5 to 10 year process for some people. You know,
Right.
for me, I was in a very weird place in my life, and it was, it wasn't really in my control that I ended up here in any way, shape, or form. This was just me knowing what was right in front of me, that I needed to move forward. And that's, you know, when we get into the other really most important part of this high dose work and communicating with your soul, you know, understanding what your soul is and why it came here and what it's supposed to do, helps you on a daily basis move forward and understand everything that comes at you.
Yes.
The way I like to describe it is like a path. And if you're walking down the path, it's great. Everything you need is right in front of you. The road is nicely paved. There's no challenges whatsoever. Maybe there's some challenges, but they're things that you're meant to overcome, and the tools to overcome them are also right in front of you. When you go to the right, and now you're climbing up a hill through thick jungle, things aren't going to feel so good. It's going to be a lot harder, and things are going to keep smacking you in the face. And your soul is probably even going to throw some of those challenges at you to try to get you back to the path that you're supposed to be on. So understanding how to talk to your soul and understand what your path truly is, it's really something that all religions should be able to do. You know, they can't, because if you're just reading from a book, there's no book that's going to tell you what you're supposed to do with your life. The only one who can do that, the only one that has any remote chance of actually knowing, is your soul. It came here for a reason. So it's not like it has a chance. It knows why it decided to step into this moment of space and time and become you. There's no doubt in it why it did that. So being able to connect to it and understand that firsthand and have the experiences that it needs to show you and wants you to have, to me, is the most important thing you can do.
Yes.
So as far as leadership, in my perfect world, all the leadership of any church working with psilocybin would be at our level. You know, I know you've done this work. I know that I'm not talking to somebody who just, oh yeah, I occasionally I'll microdose mushrooms. You know, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with microdosing, but when you're really trying to understand life, the universe, why you were put here, what you're supposed to do, what God is, what your soul is, what every deep question you could ask of religion, it's in this deep work.
Absolutely. God, I could give you a hug, man. I love hearing it spoken of in this way. It's so refreshing in this world where the vast majority of the discourse around psychedelics is coming from this therapeutic depression relief. I'm really curious, what's your perspective on that whole world?
Well, you know, in general, to me, the more people that are comfortable with psilocybin, the better. So every avenue to get people to consume psilocybin in any way is getting them closer to their soul, whether they know it or not. Now, from the medical benefits, I'm not a doctor. I take this fully spiritual. You know, your soul is what can heal you. To get through things like depression, well, if you understand why you're depressed and what you went through, and you have your soul who has been through it with you and knows why you had to go through it and can help you understand it, you can cure the depression. But that's not because you're taking a pill that's curing your depression. That's because you're taking a substance that lets you go in and do the work. And by doing the work, the side effect is your cure.
Yes.
Right. So to me, a lot of these things that people are focusing on of, oh, well, psilocybin can do this or that. To me, those are side effects. And they're not bad side effects. They're great side effects.
Right,
but,
of course. Yeah.
You know, the main thing is getting you in touch with your soul. And the more we can do that, the better.
Amen. Oh, yes. What about the indigenous perspective? You know, we've got it's very interesting to me. You know, you were at the maps. I don't know if you were there at the end when there was that whole, you know, hoopla as Rick Doblin was giving his final spiel or whatever. And you know, I'm really curious, just your perspective on how if we acknowledge, integrate, value indigenous communities and how they interact with these sacraments? What do we take from them? What do we leave behind? Where do you stand in that relationship?
Yeah, well, let me first just say I wasn't actually there for it, but I did see the video of it, and I've been friends with Rick for a very long time, and to me, the way he handled that situation just proved how amazing of a person he is.
Absolutely.
So
Let me just say, you weren't there, but when the way he handled it, right? And when he invited those people up on the stage, there was like a moment of silence, and I shouted, "Now that's a leader right there!" And everybody, I was just so grateful to be able to give that to him, because I just respected how he handled that to the nth degree. Anyway,
no,
sorry.
yeah, it again, you brought it up, so I had to say something.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah,
but
I didn't mean to highlight.
When it comes to the indigenous perspective, I want everybody to have access to these things. I don't want there to be any sort of gatekeeper. There is some things that I do personally feel should be reserved for indigenous. Peyote, for one, that's a endangered species. There's a bunch of other cactuses that produce mescaline. If you ask the experts, they will even say that peyote isn't the best one, and that there's other ones that give you a better experience. So if they want to hold peyote, I think they should. I think somebody needs to protect it. And as somebody who deeply respects everybody's perspective when it comes to these things, I beyond that want the plant to survive. So with peyote, it takes 10 years to grow a button, and if everybody's like, "Oh, I got to go do peyote right now," how long before there's no more peyote? And that's part of the major problem there. On the other thing, there was some things that MAPS fucked up with that conference, and some of those things were brought up a little bit, but some of those they weren't actually. They were things that I heard separately from other people, and it mainly had to do with the MAPS people not fully understanding they're flying some of these indigenous people out without the ability for them to actually spend money out here. It's if you're coming from a indigenous tribe somewhere, you don't have money to get food and to do stuff in Denver. I mean, I'm not saying you necessarily need a lot of money, but the stipends should have been better, and some accommodations could have been done a lot better. So, there's definitely a level of respect that needs to be considered as far as, if you are going to bring people to a conference out of their indigenous culture, that they're taken care of in a way that they don't have to struggle while they're out here. So there's some of that I think really needs to be understood more of, if you are going to engage these people, actually give them the full value that they deserve, because in where you're bringing them from, they are likely one of the most valuable people there. Your shaman, who's responsible for understanding the spiritual woes of the community, is a pretty significant person. So, and then as far as like the overlap of practice, I think everybody should practice in a way that feels right to them. And if that means that you're connecting with some ancient Native American ancestors, or if that means that you're connecting with some ancient European ancestors, where we track our original knowledge to is 2.5 million years ago, when our pre-human ancestors first came across the mushroom. So to us, we're, in every respectful way possible, we're the oldest thing that existed, and we just want everybody to have access and to be able to use these tools. So it's not, in any way, shape, or form that I disrespect anybody's practices. It's more that I don't want there to be any gatekeepers unless there's a good reason for it. And peyote is a good reason. If you're talking about trying to commune with some ancient ancestors, it really all depends on what the work is that you need to do. And for instance, in my last ceremony, which is actually something that I'm going to talk about during my Easter event this weekend, I connected with some ancient grandmothers of this land. And, this was, so my intent was do what must be done. And that was the intent that I went into the trip with. So I had no idea what was going to happen. I just knew that there was something that I was supposed to do. And this trip was actually all about communicating with the spirits that are all right around me. Ones that, it's not that I consider them lesser than me, but they're at a lower level, and they're surrounding me and they're helping me, and they're very important to me. But the whole trip ended up me interacting with all of these different ones and just thanking them and telling them how much I loved them and that I appreciated everything that they were doing, until I came across these ancient grandmothers. And they were in a lot of pain. They were screaming out that nobody pays attention to them, and they've been here loving us forever. And they showed me this beautiful vision of this Native American woman sitting up in some magical trees on the coast, just overlooking the ocean, and the beautiful memories that these spirits had when they had a real connection to us. And they still love us. They still consider themselves mothers to us, but nobody's really talking to them. There's a lot of people that feel that they have some connections to them, but to actually have a direct conversation with them, we've lost those practices. Although, I know this is going to be put out after my sermon, one of the things that they told me that I'm going to mention publicly for the first time during the sermon is that there's a major earthquake coming, and that we need to be prepared for it. And we're in California. This is not something that scientists aren't saying, right? I mean, the scientists are saying we're well overdue, and there's going to be something that happens. They were saying it's coming really soon, and showing me a time when we used to have such a close relationship with them. When things like this were happening, they would just let us know. We would all take a little trip for a while. Well, things got a little rough out here, and then when things were safe, they'd let us know, and we would come back. Because these were our ancient mothers. They looked at us as their children. And when I say us, I'm not just talking about Native Americans, humans, period. To them, we are these souls. We aren't a skin color. We aren't a race. We are these beautiful souls that have come into this space and time. And they did the relationships in this area, and the mothers that were part, and they're all up and down the coast. There isn't just one. There's many spirits all over the place. And they remember these times when humans were so close to them that they consider them our children, their children. So, when it gets into things that people hopefully will be able to do one day again, and when it gets into the indigenous practices that are left and the work that people are trying to do, to me, the most important thing is whatever tools you're using to connect to your soul, to understand your soul, to learn the language of the soul, so that you can communicate with all these other things that are right around us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You take me back to an experience that I had several years ago where I was there was a series of trials really that took place over the course of years, but they culminated in one specific journey. And after kind of coming through this trial, I was welcomed into the grandmother circle, and it was just so much of this. You are our children. We are always watching. We are always caring for you. And about probably 5 years after that experience, I was revisited by them, and the message was, why are you forgetting? Why are you not speaking to us? Why are you not? It's really that ties so much together for me, and it's something I want to continue. I have been much more mindful of that communication since that second encounter, call it, but I feel like me personally and us collectively can do so much more to be in communication with our watchers, with our ancestors, those who are supporting us on the other side.
The ones that love us on the other side.
The ones that love us. It's so and it was such a deep love. It was such a
what I experienced was both love and pain. They loved us so much, they still want to help us. They've been neglected for so long. There's, especially in this area, the Silicon Valley, all the tech shit, all the development.
The U.S. overall, what the way that we have objectified the divine, the feminine in Western culture in particular is just it's just so much heartache there, and it does feel. Are you familiar in any way with Chris Bledsoe and his work?
No.
He's one of the most researched UFO experiencers, and kind of the center of his message. He has a fascinating story, well documented by multiple government agencies. It's really fascinating. But the center of his whole story basically is the kind of this returning of the goddess, that it is the balance is shifting back into honoring the feminine and the goddess. Really interesting work. Oh, Dave, it's been such a pleasure. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I want to save some stuff for hopefully another conversation, but I do want to ask you before we end this conversation here, what I always ask my guests, and I think you may have a very interesting response to this, is, as the name of the podcast is Psilocybin Says, what does psilocybin say to you?
We all need to access our souls. That's, to me, one of the most important things in this world. If this was a practice taught and a world where everybody knew that this was a possibility and it was even a coming of age type of activity, like if this was a part of a coming of age ceremony and everybody could understand why they came here and what they're supposed to do, the world would be a better place.
Absolutely. I mean, that's ultimately, I try to share this every opportunity I can. So many times over the years, people have thought that the message of my work is mushrooms, but that's not. The message of my work is to find your soul's purpose and live it out, embody it.
I mean, that's why we get along.
I very much enjoy your company, Dave. I very much, there's definitely some places where we may have different perspectives, but man, the overlap is incredible, and I very much appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Yeah,
today.
thanks for having me.